departing speaker that we're so happy to have with us. It's a very special privilege on my part to introduce a very, very lovely lady who is with the governor from Boise today, Mrs. John Evans, who's in the audience. Mrs. Evans. Our speaker today is a man who has been in politics since the age of 27, after attending Idaho State University and graduating from Stanford University. Our speaker today was elected to the state senate in Idaho in 1953 and served as majority leader from 1957 through 1959. He was then mayor of Malad from 1960 through 1966 and then returned to the Idaho State Senate where he was minority leader from 1969 until 1974. He was elected Idaho's lieutenant governor in 1974 and became the governor of Idaho on January the 24th, 1977, when Governor Cecil Andrus resigned to serve in the Carter cabinet. He has been re-elected governor of the state of Idaho twice since taking office. He also served as the chairman of the Western Governors Conference in 1978. He also hosted in 1985, for the first time in the history of Idaho, the National Governors Conference. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a very special privilege to introduce to you the governor of the state of Idaho, the Honorable John B. Evans.
Thank you very much, Tony Stewart. I presume that President Schuler is here somewhere. I need to recognize him, whether he's here or not. Recognize him. There he is, way back here. Thank you very much, Barry. Barry Schuler has been the president of North Idaho College for many years now. And he's one of the very finest presidents of our university college system in the state of Idaho, and I just want to always give him that special recognition that he deserves by providing the kind of leadership that we need to have here at North Idaho College in Coeur d'Alene. Thank you very much, Barry, on behalf of all of the people for your leadership. Well, it is a great pleasure to be able to be here today to speak at this particular forum dedicated to the problems of racism and bigotry. I have one story. It has nothing to do with either one of those topics that I'd like to tell. It's a story about education. It's a story about a mother who is trying to get her son out of bed, and we've all had that experience as parents and as students. The mother had gone down to the son's room and said, "It's time to go to school. Come on, get up." The son threw the covers over his head and said, "I'm not going to school." The mother says, "You've got to go to school. Now get out of bed and go to school." And he repeated, "I'm not going to school." So she finally thought, "I'll use some reason this morning." She said, "All right, give me 2 reasons why you shouldn't go to school." And from under the covers, the son said, "I hate school and the kids hate me." And then the son, knowing the mother was still standing there, said, "All right, mother, give me 2 reasons why I should go to school." And the mother replied, "Because you're 43 years old and you're the principal." As the governor of the state of Idaho, I always believe in accentuating the positive. Idaho is a wonderful place to live. We have clean air and clean waters, scenic, beautiful wilderness areas, an abundance of natural resources, cultural and recreational opportunities abound all over our beautiful state. And we have a population that is diverse and well educated. I commend North Idaho College and the Kootenai County Task Force of Human Relations for their leadership in sponsoring this year's forum in choosing such an important topic for discussion. I've been told that more funds have been committed to this year's forum than at any time in the 16-year history of the program. I commend you all for bringing to Coeur d'Alene and to North Idaho nationally recognized speakers. For a few isolated groups and individuals, our diversity as a people is viewed as a threat rather than as an asset. Although small in number, these people have a blind, unreasoned intolerance for diversity. They hold the perverted notion of what America is all about, promoting senseless racism and religious prejudice. In their preaching, they suggest that the American way of life is about to be destroyed by some ethnic and/or religious minority. Jews, blacks, Hispanics, the American Indians are viewed as not real Americans, but as outsiders, responsible for most of the problems of what is wrong with America today. These small, shrill voices of bigotry offer simple solutions and simple reasons to our complex economic problems that our nation is presently facing. Their tactic has a name. It's called scapegoating. Anyone who doubts the power of this tactic needs to reflect on Hitler's message and the astonishing acceptance of the people of Germany during the 20s and 30s of the century. In today's challenging economic conditions, there are those who are constantly tempted to find scapegoats for all of our social and economic woes. We must not allow ourselves to forget the lessons we have learned for so many times in the past. Scapegoating leads to a nightmare of hatred and divisiveness, capable of destroying the social fabric of our nation. Its victims are primarily ethnic and religious minorities, but in truth, we are all in danger of becoming the victims if we allow intimidation and fear to prevail. It is important for all of us to remember that the strength of our democratic society and nation and this great state of Idaho comes from the tolerance of diversity. Diversity that results in the creative and progressive society that we appreciate. A society where every individual's rights as a citizen are guaranteed. Our task is to create from this diversity and individuality a unity of purpose and a firmness of will that secures for all the people the blessings of peace and prosperity. This is no easy task, and it must not be left up to just to the jobs of those civil rights leaders. It's a task for all of us. We as Idahoans must promote a respect for diversity in every aspect of our lives. We need to ask ourselves whether the racial jokes are really funny, or whether by telling those stories we are falling into the trap of categorizing or stereotyping racial and religious groups. We need to acknowledge that perhaps the greatest threat to the goals of eradicating discrimination comes not from the outrageous and ugly acts of intimidation and violence committed by just a few, but from the more passive bigotry of simply accepting the racist and bigoted thinking and acting without responding or objecting. To be tolerant of prejudice is to be a part of it. To be tolerant of prejudice is to be a part of it. As the governor of the great state of Idaho, I've always made my office available to organizations and groups wishing to commemorate justice and equality. Events such as the commemoration of the memory of Martin Luther King Jr. or of the Days of Remembrance of the Holocaust have been among the more memorable and meaningful of all of my public functions there in the Capitol. I was pleased to be one of the first to call for the passage of the malicious harassment bill. I was joined by literally hundreds of individuals and organizations who believed that Idaho needed to make a strong public policy statement decrying intimidation and violence based on religious intolerance or racial bigotry. The law passed by a resounding majority, sending a clear signal across the land that the people of Idaho will not tolerate those who harass minority groups. Law enforcement officers report that the malicious harassment law has been a major deterrent in quelling cowardly acts that had previously occurred within our state. I was pleased to be able to appoint Under Sheriff Larry Broadbent from Kootenai County to a 3-year term on the Human Rights Commission. Larry is a strong advocate for strict and professional law enforcement when dealing with the white supremacist organizations. He has been assigned to the responsibility of monitoring the activities of the Aryan Nation Racist Society here in Kootenai County, and has kept us all alert to the problem that could occur. The state police and the Department of Corrections have been alert to the need to monitor their operations to ensure that pernicious assaults against our pluralistic society are quelled in a swift and sure manner. I have strongly supported the Human Rights Commission, created in 1969, to secure for all of the individuals within this state freedom from discrimination because of race, color, sex, religious, or national origin, where it affects their education, employment, public accommodations, or real estate transactions. The Commission has handled complaints in an efficient and effective manner. The commissioners themselves are a beautiful example of the rich diversity within our state. Chinese, Black, American Indian, Jew, Christian, Hispanic, young and old. Martin Luther King once said that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Another great American, Robert Kennedy, stated that responsibility is the greatest right of citizenship, and service is the greatest of freedoms and privileges. I challenge you today to lend your support to groups such as the Kootenai County Task Force on Human Relations and the Interstate Task Force on Human Relations. Learn about prejudice. It is, after all, a learned behavior. Be alert to persons or groups who think themselves superior to others. Be wary when group superiority is used to advance the group itself at the expense of others. Reject notions that the American way of life is about to be destroyed by those who are not white, are not Christian. Be watching to see if the media, local authorities, and the opinion leaders, or the public at large, are seemingly tolerant of perverted notions coming from the mouths of those supremacists. Have the courage to speak out in opposition to these undemocratic and un-American bigots. You can make a difference. If all of us were to speak out whenever we saw an injustice based on bigotry, the effect would be a snowball into a mighty force for good. In closing, I'd like to repeat a statement made by a great and humane leader, President Franklin D. Roosevelt. On November the 1st, 1940, he said, "We are a nation of many nationalities, many races, and many religions. bound together by a single unity, the unity of freedom and equality. Let's reflect on that statement and not tolerate racism or bigotry in any way here in our beautiful state of Idaho. Thank you very much. Suggested that we have time for some questions. If there are any questions in relation to the issues that we're talking about or other issues that you would like to discuss, I'd be very happy to respond. You can call it an IC press conference for that. Yes, sir.
I'd like to get the Governor's impression on the relationship between governmental regulations such as immigration and naturalization laws versus the church's role in offering sanctuary to political refugees from Central America.
One thing about it, we certainly like to have discuss controversial issues. Well, obviously, we have to support the laws of the country today. We have to support and obey and enforce our immigration and naturalization laws. But yet there's a humane reason for offering that sanctuary to those who are in need for protection and assistance in the process. So I would suggest that in enforcing the laws, that we should be as tolerant as we possibly can to the needs of recognizing the needs of those individuals who need that protection and care. So I think once again, what we were talking about here today in my speech, let's talk in terms of the tolerance and recognizing the needs of those in Central America, and whenever we can, grant that opportunity for those churches to provide that kind of special care that they can provide and only they can provide. I hope that answers it. Let's be a little bit tolerant. Yes, ma'am.
I wanted to ask about money that's coming to Disney County. The governor talked in the last couple of years, the social programs, which are directed mainly toward the minorities in this county, which are children, women, and victims of crime. I wanted to address that and give us some idea of what might be done in the future to feed these programs or bring more money to the county.
We have seen over the period of several years now a reduction in the amount of resources that we're getting from the federal level. And as a result of those cutbacks of federal assistance to our Department of Health and Welfare, we're seeing local resources drying up. This resources coming to the state drying up, and therefore we can't allocate those resources to assist in the areas you speak of. And conditions economically throughout our state are not very bright today to look to the future with very much optimism that there are going to be some additional money allocated at the state level to support these particular programs. The social programs are the ones that have been hurt the worst, and unfortunately, it's the truth. I would suggest that the legislature, once again, is going to have to readdress this financial and funding issue for all of government, all of state government. Here at North Idaho College, we have needs for enhancing and improving the opportunities for education right here in Coeur d'Alene and North Idaho. Our other universities and colleges have the same needs. Our public schools have the same needs. But we're seeing the revenues that are derived from our tax structure diminishing. I had to initiate a holdback here just a couple of weeks ago, 2.5%. Every agency and state government now are scrambling to identify how they can cut another 2.5% of their budget. I've suggested to the legislature for several years that we needed to look at the reorganization of our whole tax structure, to look at it and address the issues of loopholes, address the issue of equity in the taxation structure with an open mind, and try to come up with additional resources that would be available for the needs of education, including these social programs at the local level. I've not had much success with the legislature. They have not been as progressive in education or as progressive in supplying the needs, recognizing the needs of social programs as I have. But I keep trying. And I think what you can do as citizens and as students is speak to your legislators here in Kootenai County, in the North Idaho, and suggest that additional resources are needed for all of these many programs that we see diminishing in resources. That would be my suggestion, and I'll be taking a leadership role, making recommendations when I present my budget to the legislature the 1st of June. Yes, ma'am?
After coming to
I would not suggest that it's little money fed into our public school system. It's not enough money to be fed into the school system. When you think that 3/4 of the general fund budget, 3/4 of $600 million almost, goes for education from kindergarten through the university system, the principal responsibility of state government today, and the principal responsibility of the governor and the legislature in dealing with the issue of state services is education. So we're making a substantial effort to improve the opportunities in education, and unfortunately we've been hit with some economic problems facing the state, and so we've seen the resources shrinking rather than growing as we had projected, and as had been happening over the period of many, many years. We're going to have to look for those additional resources. And I would suggest by securing those additional resources, one of the highest of my priorities is the support for our public school program within the state. And I say that not in difference to our university and college program, but that we made plans to improve our public school program here 2 years ago by increasing our salary schedules for our teachers, improving the opportunities to attract and hold our good teachers. And as a result of the recessionary period we're suffering in, we did not have those resources available, even though I recommended to the legislature again that we increase those resources. The last session of the legislature, they did not support my recommendation. As a result, we had had more or less a status quo budget. We could not allocate the money that I recommended to our public school program. So I think, once again, we're looking at some additional needs for resources. We're going to have to join together as a state, and I've said many times before that the people of Idaho support the education of our children and students at the highest of priorities. As I go around the state of Idaho and visit with people and groups, they're always saying the same thing. How can you expect Idaho to progress? How can you expect Idaho to grow and attract industry and business to invest in Idaho, to create jobs for our people, if we don't have the highest of qualified citizens who've been able to receive a very fine and high-quality education? And I talk to the same constituents that the legislature talks to, but they get a different message. I think it's the message they want to hear. The message that I hear constantly is a message of improvement and the need for improvement. So I'll be there. I'll be supporting and encouraging the legislature once again to raise those resources up so that we can provide a higher quality education than we've ever provided before.
Mr.
Yes,
Governor, would you explain two questions for me, please? First of all, how can a group like the Aryan Nations be allowed to progress to the point where they injure and victimize innocent people when it's morally considered to be wrong by a majority of the people in this area? And secondly, would you explain what kind of a detriment has been done to the state of Idaho by such a group?
I think everybody heard the question. We're talking about the Aryan Nation group here once again. First off, we were able to secure the passage of a malicious harassment bill in the legislature, and that has prevented the harassment that was taking place by supposedly some of the Aryan Nation followers in the northern Idaho area. And as I indicated in my address, the law enforcement officials have indicated that as a result of the passage of that act, they've seen a substantial reduction, a deterrent of activities directed toward harassment of the individual Idahoans who find themselves in that circumstance, as minorities or as religious minorities particularly. I'm not familiar with recent activities that you're really addressing. It seems to me that we've been able to take care of that problem by diligent law enforcement and enforcement of our laws here in the state and within the area. And I commend law enforcement agencies for doing what they needed to do to bring it to the forefront and saying to the people of this region and the people across the country that Idaho is not going to tolerate harassment in any way or bigotry. So we're working that direction. How they established here, you know, it gets back to the basic freedoms that we all hold very dear to our hearts. And we can't object. We can't prevent. We can object, but we can't prevent them from locating a camp here. They're not breaking the law. They're staying within their compound. They're protecting themselves. They have to. But they're also Americans, and they also have the same rights and the same freedoms that we have. And so we have to protect their freedoms too. But I think we've pretty well got that under control. I think they've stepped outside of the compound enough now. Most of them, a good share of them, are in federal court today, being prosecuted for some of the deeds that they have perpetrated. And that we're hopeful that they'll get the message one of these first days and leave the parts unknown. That will be my
practice of the anti-harassment law here. We really appreciate it. It was very practical for the law still allowed to coexist. And his whole philosophy is racism and hatred. And we read in the South, the Ku Klux Klan, we're beginning to hear all over the United States, these people are still allowed to exist and to preach this world. And surely there has to be a law that punishes. We've got to do something about it. Why is Mr. Butler allowed to live and to propagate his whole philosophy of hatred and division in this United States? And is there no law that I mean, he has a church activated right now, doing exactly what we're doing so hard to finish and surprise and to put out of order. He's starting the same thing again and again. Surely we've got to get to the root of the problem. Mr. Butler is one of the greatest roots of the problem in this area, and he's sitting up in his camp right now, preparing for another attack. Well, what can we do about it, Mr. I appreciate it.
Well, I presume what we can do is continue to monitor his activities, and if he's in violation of the law, to enforce those laws. As far as passing laws, additional laws that would curtail his freedoms, would also curtail our freedoms, and we would soon find them to be declared unconstitutional in fact. So I think it's just a matter of continuing to monitor and watching very carefully, and we're doing that. And beyond that, it's a very difficult choice. Once again, to restrict his freedoms will restrict our freedoms. And how we can counter it is to counter the other side.
It's unconstitutional to preach racial hatred. Isn't that unconstitutional?
No, I don't think so. No, sir. I don't think that's constitutional at all. That's a right, a freedom, freedom of speech, to do what he feels is right. Then and ours, we have his philosophy. Ours is on the other side. Is what I'm suggesting, that all Americans and all Idahoans need to speak out against bigotry and racism, to try to prevent that continuing activity that is taking place. And we all join together. I emphasize, we'll see a snowballing of support and opposition to that racism that he preaches. One more question. Yes? Would you like to start over again? We've had the problem of nuclear waste and nuclear waste storage and disposal ever since we first created nuclear problems and the atomic bomb. We have quite a lot of waste in eastern Idaho. It's not the high-level waste, but we have some transuranic waste over there in eastern Idaho being stored there. I worked very hard over the period of years to try to get a final resting place for it, a final depository for our high-level nuclear waste. And unfortunately, we've got very few places within the United States that we can identify for long-term storage. I served on a special fact-finding committee appointed by President Porter to address the issue of nuclear waste and finding that final depository. And we identified several, 4 or 5, that have been under study and have been under study now for several years. Eventually, and I'm not sure how soon, I think the time frame talks in terms of close to 1990, that we will have that site identified and prepared to start storing for all times a final resting place and a permanent repository. To prevent the transportation of those nuclear waste into that depository would be difficult or almost impossible to achieve. We can't deposit those nuclear waste that will last for thousands of years near population centers. That does not make much sense. So they're isolated areas in the desert areas, primarily out here in the west. And we'll see the potential of, because Idaho is on the transportation network going through the northwest, that we will see some of those nuclear waste transported and hopefully in proper containers and properly monitored in the process to protect the integrity of our area and our citizens.
Governor, thank you very much for your listening today. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you'll be back again today. Thanks again, Governor.
He is in charge of the activities of for the 13 western states. He is a Phi Beta Kappa graduate, Mr. David Lair.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here again up in this beautiful country. I've been up twice before, dealing with unpleasant problems, the order, urination, and it's nice to be up here to deal with a pleasant task, to discuss and try and bring the Jewish perspective to bear on the subject which you have had addressed this past week, that of racism and anti-Semitism in our society. I must say, in assessing the data, as one looks around and tries to figure out what's going on, it isn't all that simple. One can perceive a trend as going in one direction or another, often depending upon the perspective or history one brings to the subject. And having all the facts, even if one had all the facts in front of them, one would reach, I must say, very awkward, probably inaccurate conclusions as to where events are moving or what they portend. It reminds me a bit of the man who woke up in the middle of the night dreaming of red neon numbers flashing 555. And he looked at his watch and it was 5:55 in the morning and he couldn't go back to sleep. And he decided that he might as well get up. And he went downstairs. By the time he was ready to go to work, he had drunk 5 cups of coffee. He read the 5 sections of the newspaper, and it took him oddly enough 55 minutes to get to work. And he decided that, being a man who liked to go to the races, that someone was giving him a hunch, and he ought to make it out to the nearest racetrack and bet his hunch. So he went to the bank, withdrew all of his savings, and he put everything he had on course number 5 in the 5th race. But I think had he analyzed his facts properly and what they were telling him, he would have realized that course number 5 in the 5th race was going to come in 5th, which he did. Which I think suggests that you might have the facts in front of you, but unless you analyze those facts properly, those facts are not going to do you much good. Well, I think we at the Anti-Defamation League pride ourselves in analyzing facts properly. And discussing the subject of anti-Semitism in our society today might strike someone as being, well, at least someone outside the northern panhandle of Idaho who has had, I must say, a good deal of experience with anti-Semites and the kind of baggage they bring with them right here in Haven Lake. But someone outside of this area who may not be as sensitive to and as aware of the problem might say, well, it's a bit foolish, perhaps paranoid on the part of the Jewish community to be concerned about anti-Semitism. After all, if one looks at indices of security and success in American society, Jews aren't doing too badly. Jews generally average above the average of most Americans in income. In years of education and graduate education, the Jewish community is doing very well, and again, it's above the average of most white Americans. And by most measures of success in American society, the Jews have been successful. Nevertheless, Jews feel insecure. there is a lingering predominant and ever-present insecurity. Is this malaise of paranoia? I don't think so. And I think your experience here up in the Northern Panhandle with the folks not too far away up in Dayton Lake suggests that that fear, that concern, that troubling disquiet is not paranoia. In fact, as we've seen right here, anti-Semitism, anti-Jewish rabble-rousing has been the galvanizing force which has really kept some of these extremist groups together. The statistical evidence on anti-Semitism suggests that we are also not guilty or victims of paranoia. If one defines, as academics have, anti-Semitism as being having predominant negative images of Jews, Jews as being money, Jews as being dishonest or unethical, Jews as being clannish, prideful, conceited, power-hungry, pushy, and intrusive, if you define those as being the characteristics which mark anti-Semites, and you do polling, as the University of California, Berkeley did on behalf of the Anti-Defamation League in the mid-60s, and the seminal study, Patterns of American Prejudice, and which has been revalidated very frequently by other polling services, you find in the American public that some 37% believe in a majority of these anti-Semitic stereotypes, which could define them as the most anti-Semitic. Another 32% are mildly anti-Semitic, believing in 3 to 4 of the negative stereotypes, and approximately 31% disregard these characteristics or these traits as being stereotypes. They recognize them as stereotypes. So if you look at it in total, you see that some approximately two-thirds of the American public is susceptible to some pretty damning anti-Semitic stereotypes. If you look at progress, though, we must see that progress has been made in the general attitude of Americans vis-a-vis the Jewish community and in terms of anti-Semitic attitudes. If one compares polls conducted in 1945 with those conducted in 1964, for example, and one of the main questions was, if a candidate for Congress declares himself to be anti-Semitic, would you vote for him? The numbers that would vote for an anti-Semitic candidate for Congress went from 23% in 1945 down to a very nominal 5%. Those who said they would vote against the candidate because he's anti-Semitic went from 31% in 45 to 58% in 1964. And the numbers to whom it made no difference who didn't know were virtually the same. Thus, 1/3 of the American public harbors some strong anti-Semitic beliefs, another third are moderately anti-Semitic. And very few Americans, we find from polling data, support discrimination against Jews in housing, in employment, or other traditional arenas which mark some of the hallmarks of anti-Semitism until the civil rights laws of the mid-1960s. There has been, without a doubt, a tremendous change and tremendous progress. But negative stereotyping continues, and as Lewis Harris concluded in the polls a few years ago, far more non-Jews now tend to think the Jews have made it, and therefore they do not really require allies in the non-Jewish community for the fight against anti-Semitism when it might appear. Jews have fewer strong supporters among non-Jews today than they did in the past, although the number of critics are not increasing. Well, having said that, and having reviewed some of the hard data, perhaps we ought to look at where the sources of anti-Semitic beliefs are. In most of our society today, with one major exception, that exception being black element in society, black people with whom education and rising socioeconomic status increases the propensity towards anti-Semitism. In every other segment of society, as education increases, anti-Semitism decreases. We think it's a clear, direct correlate to increased reduction in stereotyping as you become more educated, you realize your susceptibility to stereotype people. And we think also in education results in people learning the norms and mores of society, which certainly look down and frown upon the kind of bigotry and stereotyping which people might otherwise be more susceptible to. And historically, in Western society, another major source of anti-Semitism has been the fundamentalist views which taught that there was an exclusive way to salvation, which was belief in Jesus, and that there was damnation for anyone who was a non-believer. To the
extent that those two were coupled together, it led in many instances to some of the worst instances of anti-Semitism in the Western world. Of course, in the past 20 years, much has changed. Vatican II, the Ecumenical Council, in both the Catholic liturgy and in the more modern view of many of the Protestant denominations in our country, that which was taught for decades and even centuries has been altered over the past 20 to 25 years. That's some of the good news, that things have changed. I think we ought to look now, though, at what the individual sources, not the psychological, not the academic sources of anti-Semitism are, but who the purveyors of anti-Semitism are in our society today. And I can say with a great degree of certitude, coming from the unfortunately vast experience of the Anti-Defamation League in our 30 offices around the country, that anti-Semitism today is almost predominantly a product of the political extremes. Not the political extreme solely of the far right, but of the political extremes, the far right and the far left. It might be surprising to some, but it certainly was not surprising to us, when academics at the University of California at Berkeley published a study last year, which was a result of their having surveyed political extremists at both ends of the political spectrum. And what they found was that extremists on both ends of the political spectrum had more in common with each other in their views of society than they had in common with people who were more moderate, perhaps closer to them ideologically, but in the mainstream of the political process. The two extremes were closer than they were to anybody within the mainstream. They found that political extremists had certain common views of the world. They both resented politicians in power. They viewed the world in terms of conspiracies. They both supported populist campaigns to return power, on the one hand, on the left, to the masses, on the other hand, on the right, to the common people. They both disapproved of present-day society in general. They both were intolerant of ambiguity. They both had a hatred of political opponents. They both were attracted to totalitarian measures, and they both had paranoid tendencies to view the world. Some statistics. In their view of totalitarianism, 7% of those on the left, 24% of those on the extreme right, but only 13% of those in the middle agreed that, quote, to bring about great change in society often requires cruelty and ruthlessness. In terms of paranoid beliefs, in response to the question that really important matters are decided behind the scenes by people we never even hear about, on the far left, 63% they agreed. On the far right, 54% they agreed, but in the middle, only 25% agreed. And perhaps the most telling question today, the question of free speech. The extremes agree that free speech should only be granted to those who will in turn grant free speech. The left agreed 47%, the right agreed 39%, and the moderates only agreed 17%. Quarreling with the basic doctrine of the First Amendment. Let us take a look then at the proponents of anti-Semitism, the purveyors of hate on the political extremes, to see in fact what they're saying, and to see how they're doing. I'll try and give you an assessment of the success or lack of success of these groups today in 1985. On the far right, despite the hoopla that's been attended to Mr. Butler and the Aryan nations and the posse comitatus, the covenants over the arm of the Lord in Missouri and Arkansas, and the order of the trial that's going on right now in Seattle, the fact is, the positive fact is that the numbers of members of extremist groups on the far right today is less than it was 3, 4, 5 years ago. The various Klan and neo-Nazi groups, the associated far-right extremist groups, are all significantly down in terms of the membership that they have. The numbers are down. There's been a severe crisis in leadership. There's been fragmentation among the various groups. And perhaps one of the most telling examples was misinterpreted. Not unlike the man who misread the 555 sign when he went to the races. Many in the press, many in various civil rights groups misread one very important sign, which was a precursor of what went on here the last year and a half, when there was a Klan rally in Los Angeles, a cross burning in December of 1983. There was a cross burning in Los Angeles, greater Los Angeles, which was interpreted by many in the media and in the civil rights community to be a dangerous sign of a rebirth of the Klan in Southern California. The fact is that they had a cross burning on private land, and there were about 23 people in attendance. This was the Klan's first real showing of activity in the Southern California area for quite a while. But while the Klan did burn a cross, and they had 23 people there, the fact is that Richard Butler had to come down from Idaho to make the 23, and that people had to be brought in from San Diego, from Riverside counties, from San Bernardino, and from around the West in order to reach that number of 23. And we know that of that number of 23, several were undercover agents for various law enforcement agencies. One of them was a journalist who was doing writing about the Ku Klux Klan, the Aryan Nation. And of the 23, 15 were arrested, spent time in jail, and faced the real prospect of spending several years in jail for having violated a whole variety of ordinances in Southern California. So while the facts at first blush and the headlines were that the Klan returned to Southern California, the fact is that that cross burning was merely a testimony to the bankruptcy of the Klan in most of Southern California, and to the fact that there wasn't much activity to speak of in the West generally. And that is one reason. The depleting numbers, the paucity of media attention, which drove disgruntled members of the Aryan Nation to the kinds of desperate acts we saw them engaging in over the past 14 and 15 months. The robbing of Brink's trucks, the murder of radio talk show hosts, the alleged murder of some disgruntled members, and murder of a state trooper in Missouri, the robbing of armored cars in Ukiah, California, banks in Spokane and Seattle, and other communities. We view those acts not as signs of a resurgent far-right extremism, but in fact as a sign of a nearly bankrupt organization which felt that it had no choice but to assert itself, to show the flag, to show that it was still alive and vital in the hopes of attracting members, because they felt that Armageddon was around the corner. But as effective law enforcement, as effective media exposure shown, their plans certainly were not successful. 23 or so members are now facing a real prospect of lengthy prison terms as a result of the activities of the past year and a half. We don't take any great solace in the fact that the numbers are down. As the events of the past 14 or 15 months show, a small handful of individuals can create a good deal of violence. They can terrorize a community. They can blow up a synagogue in Boise, Idaho. They can scare people. They can murder people. But in terms of a real, viable, potentially effective political movement, it just isn't there. And the solace we take from the status that these people find themselves in right now is that the vast majority of Americans, the 99.99%, who hear their message, completely reject it. And they are relegated to a very small percentage who might buy their irrational theories about the world, their theories of Jewish conspiracies causing them problems, their attempts to try and get good people, for example, over the past few months in the Midwest, the beleaguered farmers who face very real economic crises, to try and get them to believe their bizarre theories as to what is the cause of the problems, have almost uniformly fallen on deaf ears. Despite what ABC might have told you in 2020 a few weeks ago, that movement has not been successful. But those people realize it. Many of them know that engaging in the kind of vulgar racism and anti-Semitism that might have worked 20 years ago or 30 years ago or 40 years ago, that might have filled auditoriums for Gerald L.K. Smith in the 40s and 50s, doesn't work in the 1980s. So what some of these bigots have attempted is to try and package their hate a little more subtly, to try and wrap themselves in a mantle of acceptability, so that the stench of bigotry won't come through. The fact is, I think Americans are too sophisticated for that. The attempts of an organization like Liberty Lobby, which has a veneer of legitimacy, to testify before committees of the House and the Senate, which tries to tell tell people that they're really not haters. They're different than the people who rob Brinks trucks. They're different than the folks who've gone down the regular talk show host. Has not been successful. In part because we are able to expose the fact that they're really no different. They just candy-coated their message. This is a book which is published by one of the arms of Liberty Lobby. And interestingly, it was used by area nations at one of their international conferences last year. And while their Liberty Lobby tries to sell themselves as legitimate, as respectable, as part of the mainstream of the political process, this book, for example, shows how to make homemade silencers, hardly what people in the political mainstream want to be doing. It shows you how to engage in sabotage, how to derail trains, how to ambush people, how to reform political cells for when time when the revolution is upon us. It is a manual for insurrection in this country. It was marketed by Liberty Lobby to all of their 100,000 or so subscribers around the country, and it was an attempt, a sophisticated attempt to try and package themselves a little bit differently, to try to appeal to a different audience than they normally appeal to. But I must say, not a very successful attempt at that. They tried more successfully. They founded a group called the Institute for Historical Review, argued that the Holocaust never happened. They got a bunch of academics, PhDs, to be on the board of editors. They published a quarterly journal which all the world looked like an academic publication. The fact that one of the PhDs had a degree in history was almost irrelevant to them. They had the veneer of legitimacy. They had all the trappings of an academic institution without any of the substance. And that veil has been pierced, and no one in the media takes it seriously anymore. And I think a very small percentage of the public believes that the Institute for Historical Review is anything but a vehicle for hate. But much of the activities of the past couple of years on the far right was taken as a lesson from the far left. We saw in the 60s and the 70s the far left, not unlike the far right in recent months, rob Brinks trucks. We saw that they stockpiled weapons and explosives. We saw that they fabricated false IDs. We saw that they acquired safe houses around the country. We saw that they recruited new members in prison, and we saw that they pervade anti-Semitism, very much similar to what the Aryan Nation, the Order, and others of that ilk have done of late. The lessons were taught, and taught well. And I think we ought to look at the fate of political extremism on the far left, and bigotry on the far left, because the fate of many of those organizations may be indicative of what lies ahead for Mr. Butler and some of his henchmen. Much of the bigotry of the far left is masked, not unlike the sophisticated bigots of the far right who try and mask their hate. They mask it in terms of anti-Zionism. If you were to study the newspapers of several of the far left extremist organizations published in June and July of 1982, immediately following the war in Lebanon, you would see that the imagery was classical anti-Semitism. But they didn't talk about Jews, they talked about Zionists instead. The words were simply interchangeable. The accusations were identical to those that have been hurled at Jews for centuries. Jews were accused of blood libel, lusting for the blood of non-Jews. Jews were decried as disease carriers, and the imagery and the classical stereotyping went on and on. And it's no surprise, because if we were to search the world today for the largest purveyor of raw, undistilled, vulgar anti-Semitism, we wouldn't go to Hayden Lake, we wouldn't go to Liberty Lobby in Torrance or Washington, D.C. We'd have to go to Moscow. Moscow, the Soviet Union, puts out more anti-Semitism and more sophisticated guards than anyone else in the world. Videotapes, books, pamphlets, and TV programs that probably will come close to matching what Julius Streicher put out in the Third Reich in his heyday in the 30s and 40s. For example, one of the themes of Liberty Lobby's Institute for Historical Review, in fact their main theme, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, was that the Holocaust never happened. Well, just last year in the Soviet Union, 100,000 copies of a book entitled On the Path of Aggression Racism were published in the Soviet Union. And that book argues not any differently than the IHR, the Institute for Historical Review of the far right, and I quote, that the 6 million figure of Jews killed during World War II has never been scientifically substantiated. It has been increased by the Zionists twofold to threefold, at the very least. The utility of anti-Semitism has not been lost on the Soviet Union. And that theme, unfortunately, has trickled down to some far-left extremist organization in this country who, in their desire to make points in the debate over the Middle East, have been willing to engage in anti-Semitism, not unlike that used by the far-right extremists in our country. Over the past few months, an adjunct of far-left extremism has surfaced. And it's perhaps a new, more disturbing phenomenon. Because the fact is that bigots like Richard Butler, Pete Gilbert, or any of the others of the Posse Comitatus identity movement churches around the country have been decried, have been condemned, have been portrayed clearly as being beyond the pale of acceptable political dialogue in this country. They are seen as aberrations. They are seen as something so bizarre that they become the subject of interest in the press only insofar as they are these kinds of rare birds that are different than everybody else. But sometimes, we've seen recently, bigots on the far left have a certain acceptability, a certain palatability, a certain rationalization is offered for their bigotry, which makes them, in many senses, even more insidious. You may have read, over the past few weeks, we had a conversation down in Southern California, where I came from this morning, over a first-class bigot named Louis Farrakhan. Now, Louis Farrakhan, it's hard to describe his political views, but clearly he is on the dole from Libya's Gaddafi, Jesse Jackson, who embraced Mr. Farrakhan. Minister Farrakhan certainly has political views which categorize him as being on the left of the political spectrum. Well, Mr. Farrakhan is as anti-Semitic in his views as one can imagine. Jews control the mass media, newspapers, TV and radio, says. Hitler was a great man, another quote. And in the crowded auditorium not all that long ago, when the chant went up in response to a question from Reverend Farrakhan as to what to do when black leaders seek Jewish support, the audience yelled back, "Kill them." And when he was asked what his response was, he said, "Well, I didn't say it. I just seconded the motion." He's described Judaism as a gutter religion, and that Jews ought to know and should know their own wickedness. Words equally fitting coming from Mr. Butler as they were from Mr. Farrakhan. But unlike Reverend Butler, there are very few people, there are too many people, who will defend Mr. Farrakhan and rationalize his hate and say, well, so there's a little anti-Semitism in what he says. The fact is, his economic message is very important. When Farrakhan spoke in Los Angeles 10 days ago, members of the Jewish community went to the mayor, Bradley, and went to black leaders beforehand and said, you ought to speak out clearly, that Mr. Farrakhan has a First Amendment right to speak, and no one questions that. But a tone ought to be set to this community where there has been wonderful relations between various minority groups, that his kind of bigotry is unwelcome, and the various and multiple groups that make up our wonderful city are not going to be divided by a bigot like Mr. Farrakhan, no matter what his economic blandishments might be. But the fact is, Mayor Bradley spoke out after Mr. Farrakhan left, not before, and all too few leaders of the black community, in fact only two, spoke out before him. And even after his speech, we heard from people, well, we've got to focus on his economic message. He's speaking about the plight of blacks in our society. And indeed he did. But as I wrote in a piece in the LA Times, and as many of us said, if a Ku Klux Klan leader is offering policies as to how to better the plight of poor whites in Appalachia, do we listen to his economic plans, or do we say he's from the Ku Klux Klan, we don't much care what he has to say, because at the root of everything he says is division and rancor, bigotry. And we wanted to make clear that a basic tenet of our society is that you don't parse the message from a messenger who sells hate. That hate taints his entire message. Whether it's Reverend Butler offering solution, if you will, for disgruntled farmers in the Midwest who have a real problem, or whether it's Louis Farrakhan offering what he thinks is solution, however sophomoric they might be, to the plight of poor blacks in American society, the answer is that they have to be rejected out of hand because the baggage that they bring along with them is baggage of bigotry and hate. And once we try and separate the hate from the rest of the message, we are tainted by that hate no less than the purveyor of the hate is himself. And we pointed out to leaders in Los Angeles that all we have to do is look a little deeper at Mr. Farrakhan to see that a bigot is a bigot, and that coalescence I mentioned before that the University of California Berkeley study showed between the far right and the far left comes all the way around. Because earlier this year, at his Savior's Day celebration in Chicago, Reverend Farrakhan, Minister Farrakhan, had a whole conclave of leaders of his Nation of Islam. And among them who spoke, among those who spoke, was a live satellite transmission from Colonel Gaddafi of Libya, who advised that blacks in this country ought not serve in the army. To put that aside, among the other speakers honored at Savior's Day by Mr. Farrakhan was none other than Arthur Butz. Some of you may recall Arthur Butz's name. He's a professor of electrical engineering at Northwestern University. And he's a man who, not coincidentally, happens to be on the board of editors of the Institute for Historic Review, that far-right operation I mentioned a few minutes ago that argues that the Holocaust never happened. What is there common in ideology between Arthur Butz and Louis Farrakhan? Arthur Butz, I can assure you, is not really troubled about the plight of poor blacks in our society. But Arthur Butz is not particularly fond of Jews, not particularly fond of society and the way it operates today, nor is Mr. Farrakhan. And the bigots found the common ground. And we, I think good people, have to assure that those bigots don't find the common ground among us. In conclusion, I think if one were to view society today and try and assess anti-Semitism and bigotry, the signs are generally positive. The groups that pervade bigotry are almost all small. They almost always speak to themselves or to their very narrow constituents. They are rejected almost totally by the vast majority of American society. They are viewed, unlike in Europe where extremists are part of the political process, political extremists in our society are viewed very much outside the political process. Witness, for example, with Tom Metzger, Klan leader in California, won the nomination for the Democratic seat of Congress. He never won the general election, he won the primary. There was more copy written about that because it was seen as an aberration. It was unusual for any political extremist to have any success in the political process. And another positive sign is that with exposure, even the more sophisticated bigoted operations are rejected, and Americans smell the garbage that is at the heart of the message. And I think another most positive trend is what has transpired in this community. This community, perhaps, is the finest example of how bigotry can be isolated, of how the First Amendment can be respected, while a bigot knows that he is unwelcome in the community, and that if he wants to go peddle his hate, he better go do it someplace else. Richard Butler didn't bomb synagogues in Spokane, or in Coeur d'Alene, or in Haven Lake, nor did the order. When violent acts occurred, when criminal activity occurred, it was far away from this community. I think because this community, the Interstate Task Force, the Kootenai County Task Force, and the good people in this area made clear that Mr. Butler and his bigotry were unwelcome here. And that kind of courageous speaking out, and I must say it took courage for Larry Broadbent to speak out and to make clear where society and where the good people, where law enforcement stood on these issues. That made it very clear to Mr. Butler and his ilk that this was not a community in which they could thrive, and that if they were going to look for seeds of hate to sow, they better sow in more fertile ground than in the panhandle of Idaho. But as I said, others think, and the negative signs that I must leave you with, are that some think that we can't parse the messenger of hate from his message, that the positive programs of Mr. Farrakhan, for example, can be separated from his hate. But I think that the past 2 weeks in Los Angeles, at least, should leave a lesson for all Americans. That hate, no matter its package, no matter its guise, is unacceptable. That hate taints everything that comes from the hater. And that history has shown in the long run, it isn't bigots who gain a majority, but it is a majority who learns to tolerate bigots that causes the problem. I think no one could summarize it more aptly than did the English philosopher Edmund Burke some 2 centuries ago, when he said that all that is needed for evil to triumph is for good men, and I think we might add today good women, to remain silent. I trust that the citizens of Coeur d'Alene in this area will continue to speak out, to make sure that there is no silence when hate rears its ugly head. Thank you very much.
Every